everyone. This is update for September 11, 2023, day 565 of the war and of the date update. Also catch up for September 10. So I'm gonna, as always, start with the general strategic news developments, and then I'm gonna switch to the situation in Ukraine and on the front line. So the first news you probably saw, U.S. president visited Vietnam. And this is basically trying to create a sort of how to say, headache for China, essentially. If those who don't know, there was actually war between Vietnam and China. Generally, even though both communist regimes, there's still definitely conflict between the two. The goal basically is to ensure supply of rare earths. For those who don't remember, China essentially started blocking supply of rare earths starting early August to the U.S. in retaliation for the semiconductor war or blockade of semiconductor producing equipment. And also, the U.S. is trying to, expand semiconductor production or supply. Basically, for the most part, it's not really manufacturing. It's really just about testing. There is not much of, let's say, enough qualified workforce for really true manufacturing. So that's just going to be more, packaging, testing, and so on, allocation. While China obviously retaliated, and they are sending their delegation of their troops to participate in parade in Mexico. So, and the situation is kind of getting, I would say, interesting in terms of this because there is high tension between the U.S. and Mexico right now due to the drug war and so on. So to the point that some politicians in the U.S. calling for invasion of Mexico. So that really pushes Mexico into sort of relationship with China, and China is happy to do sort of basically the same. What the U.S. essentially did with Vietnam. Now let's actually switch to Russia and closer to the front line. So first of all, North Korean, I think he's president or dictator, let's call him really who he is, went to Vladivostok, which is here to Russia, where he's going to meet with the Russian president. And it seems to me that based on the prior exchanges, so there's probably the supply of military supply from North Korea will be sort of finalized because recently, if you remember, Russian Minister of Defense went to North Korea, and probably there were some initial agreement reached about supply of probably artillery shells, probably some other equipment to Russia. And it's going to be finalized basically in Vladivostok. So we'll see what sort of comes to the front line. Then going actually more about Russian economy. Russian economy is actually starting to feel better. And this is due to the high crude oil prices, obviously. And the Russian ruble started to strengthen to 95 Russian rubles per US dollar. At some point, it was about 100. It's still way above the sort of psychological number that most Russians used to, which is around 80. But it's getting in that direction if oil remains where it is. It's definitely going to give a lot of sort of fresh blood for Russian economy, Russian state budget to continue war efforts. So what is sort of initial results of this is that planned deficit, state budget deficit will be maintained, because before it was impossible, and now this allows Russian budget to be within the reasonable sort of target ranges, and there is even uh, sort of aspiration to have a state budget surplus in 2024 if price for crude oil remains where it is. So, in other words, we just if this persists, the strength of Russian economy is just going to grow significantly. I would say exponentially over coming months and into 2024. Again, this is if high prices for crude oil stay where they are, or maybe even going higher. However, there is sort of irony to all of this. There is real. I mentioned this before. There are real shortages of gasoline and diesel fuel developing in Russia, especially in the central regions of Russia, sort of here southwest, south of Moscow, and a little bit towards east. To the point that price for both fuel for gasoline and diesel fuel went up between 20 to 30%, and price is still probably low compared to let's say Europe and the US. So the price for 1 liter of gasoline is roughly 70 cents. This is after increase. But obviously the income in Russia is much lower, so doesn't feel sort of as cheap. And the problem with the gasoline is getting to the point that in some region of Russia they started issuing rationing cards. So basically, you have like whatever 20 liters for some period of time for a week. This is I'm just making up the specific number. I just know that there are rationing cards. Exact sort of specifics, I don't have that information. But basically, it's just kind of for those who don't understand what rationing cards means is so for you, in order for you to buy let's say gasoline, you also need to have a special card issued by government authorities, and let's say it allows you to buy only like 20 liters of gasoline per week. And in some regions, simply the fuel is being sold only to basically like agriculture or based productive, so basically to companies. It's not being sold to consumers. This is just sort of we're probably seeing early stages of this crisis, and the reason is very straightforward. As I said this before, is Russia is selling not only crude oil but refined products, and they obviously more profitable, higher margins on them than on crude oil. So, and it brings more US dollars and euros into Russian coffers. So they trying to find wherever they can opportunities to earn currency, foreign currency. This is and the part of the reason why this is becoming so desperate, because Russian economy was sort of was based on two sort of elephants, two pillars. One being crude oil and obviously refined products from crude oil, and also natural gas, which is represented by the state monopoly Gazprom. So Gazprom is essentially in a survival mode, like I would say pretty much dead, because it cannot export natural gas in the quantity that used to Europe. So effectively, you only have, if you think it like about airplane, now you have only one engine working, the other one is really not working. At least it's not burning. But just to give you feeling is, for example, Russia is selling, how desperate Russia is specifically to find different markets for its natural gas. So Russia is selling whatever it can sell still to Europe at $500 per thousand cubic meters, and it's selling the same natural gas for 300. So you see like $200 discount on the same natural gas, and that's obviously wiping out all of the profit, or almost all of the profit and margin. So essentially, Russia selling this natural gas just to get foreign currency, and that's pretty much it. And the volume in 2023 of the natural gas being sold to China is 22 billion cubic meters, and then things are not getting better for 24. So the Russia has already agreed to give an additional discount to China of $30, so it's going to be roughly $270. But the win there is that they will be able to sell 30 billion, so that it goes from 22 to 30 billion cubic meters. It's not going to save Gazprom. Just to give you a feeling, for comparison, Gazprom used to sell up to 200 billion cubic meters of natural gas to Europe. So you can imagine, let's say they sell 30 in the next year, and they may be selling another 30, 40, 50 to Europe under old contracts. So as you can imagine, it's essentially at least 60% of the export is wiped out. And also, Gazprom is reducing price for Europe to $480. So as you can see, there is definitely desperation everywhere in Gazprom and in Russian natural gas producing industry. Now let's actually get a little bit closer to the front line, and let's talk a little bit about the tank production in Russia. So everybody knows that there is this T-14 Armada, which was never produced. It just sort of like for the show. There's like handful of them, like 20 plus or something. They never been to the front line, and the problem is that effectively Russia doesn't have powerful enough engine for that tank, and that's one of the main gating items there. Not the only one, but there's many more. So this was sort of aspiration that probably will never get realized. Then what Russian MOD decided to do, they sort of downgraded to T90, and now they actually downgrading to T80. So they are renewing production of T80, and the reason for that is because simply there is not enough production capacity. So they basically expanding it to Omsk, and I think a while ago I showed the main places for the Russian tank production. So essentially they need more, and whatever they can produce at Uralvagon Zavod near Yekaterinburg is simply not enough. So they're trying to expand, and the production capacity, and so they have that plant in Omsk was equipped to produce T80 from the Soviet time. So basically, they're resurrecting all Soviet production facility, and obviously starting producing this T80. So just kind of give background, this T80 is essentially T64 with a gas turbine engine, which is powerful, and that's why it's there. And so the tank is much more mobile relative to T90, which has problems with its mobility. And relative to T72, T64, so basically this most mobile Soviet tank. This comes at the price. First of all, it just consumes tons of fuel, like just basically like, I don't know what you call it, just like a black hole of fuel consumption. That's one problem. The other problem with the engine is that the sort of resource of the engine, or how many hours it can work is roughly guaranteed is 500 hours. So that's, as you can imagine, totally not much. And then you need to replace engine or do the major maintenance after 1,000 hours. So it's quite expensive. The only plus is that you can replace the engine in 5 hours. So so basically this is the same as T64, except the price tag is about 2.5 times higher than T64. And the reason Russian sort of government, Russian MOD is doing it because they just don't have enough capacity at the T72 production facility, which produces T90, which is upgraded version of T72. And essentially, T80 is attempt to have upgraded version of T64, except it's sort of very questionable sort of upgrade. Whether it's needed or not, I'm actually not sure. This is, by the way, was modeled based on the U.S. Abrams tanks, which also has gas turbine engine and has basically all the same problems that T80 has. But when you're desperate, you do this sort of type of things. Also, another interesting detail about the situation in Russian military, this time in the Air Force. So there is like acute shortage of the pilots, like really big shortage of it, like desperation, let's put this way, to the point that if you're a pilot, if you don't want to do this whatever mission, whatever the you need to do, you could say no, I don't want to do it. And then basically which is really unheard of, that you can pick and choose what you can do and essentially kind of like command upper ground relative to, let's say, your commander, basically. So that's a sort of situation in Russian Air Force. Now let's switch to Ukraine, and I'm gonna do a walkthrough in a clockwise fashion as I always do. The situation along the state border is the same. No essential difference changes there. Now let's jump to the North Lugansk front line. Things here are also the same. No essential difference. This tactical attack by Russian troops, but really, again, as I said, nothing major. Oh, I forgot that actually Azov Brigade is now operating somewhere in this area. So this is not the same as the 3rd Brigade, because Azov is still within sort of National Guards, the silos. So this is sort of true, authentic Azov. I mean, it's definitely lost its many things, but it's sort of resurrection of that old Azov. So we'll see what sort of comes out of it. Now let's move to the North Donbass front line. The northern section of it is basically not bad, but there's always sort of skirmishes and so on, but really nothing major at all. And then the southern part is sort of has some intense fighting. Ukrainian troops pushing Russian. As I mentioned previous video, they have some successes. And then, Russian side is counterattacking, trying to regain lost ground, but so far not successful. And there is sort of slow but measurable and push with some results. But again, this is not this major offensive. This is painful tactical squeeze with zero strategic sort of perspective. Now let's move to the central Donbass front line. Things here more or less the same from a Russian perspective, as always attacks. There is a surprise from Ukrainian side. Ukrainian troops counterattacked here and managed to liberate a majority of the village called Opytne. It's near Donetsk airport that's under Russian control right now. But nevertheless, interesting sort of development. Again, this is just a tactical situation. There is literally no strategic point for Ukrainian side to basically do frontal attack against Donetsk. It's just going to be suicidal. There's not enough troops, so this is the only way to liberate Donetsk is basically encirclement. But it just call it this improvement of the sort of tactical positions there by Ukrainian forces. Then let's move to the Zaporizhya front line. Things here are sort of you know the same from Ukrainian side. This squeeze continues, but it's more interesting from the Russian side because Russian forces counterattacked Ukrainian attacking forces here in near well, they are south of Robotyne, but as you can see, Russian troops hit in the flank. They had some initial success, but then they were stopped. So again, this is potentially dangerous development. It's sort of intelligent move from a Russian command here. Obviously you want, but it's not a rocket science. It's like basically like a textbook, or like it's like everybody understands you need to hit in the flank. So, but the fact is that they're doing right things from their perspective. So far, they were stopped, but this actually exposes general weakness of this whole position because it's turning into the salient, and if the flanks are not properly sort of covered, you can potentially either have a squeeze and panic withdrawal or even encirclement. So this kind of like brings question of from Ukrainian perspective that this salient, the flanks need to be expanded in both directions to make it less salient and more stable, basically, if Ukrainian forces want to sort of keep it, because this whole so-called offensive, I don't even call it offensive, but so-called offensive is gonna fizzle out, fairly soon. I mean, it's fizzled out anyways. It never was real, but the opportunity to keep pushing it is obviously limited. And the more important is that it seems that Russian forces are accumulating reserves and trying to take initiative back in their hands. And this may sort of, the situation may get worse over time, especially into the winter. There is this sort of, I would say, naive thinking that there is no war in the winter, and no, it's going to be a war in the winter, sort of normal way. It would be high intense war. It's just going to be much more harder and difficult for the soldiers on the ground. But the winter does not stop the war. That is very delusional thinking. Then let's move to the last section of the front line along the Dnipro River. Things here are sort of status quo as they've been. Neither move, no moves from either side. Ukrainian troops sit on their bridgeheads. Russian troops don't try to do anything. I mentioned before that part of the reason is that apparently Russian command does not have enough forces in of the decent quality. I mentioned about the really horrible problems in this 205th Brigade. Essentially, it's I would say degenerated into the I would say even not a sort of military organization, sort of more like even below the peasant army. So essentially, it looks like a Russian command is just happy to keep the status quo, and then Ukraine command that is sort of big mystery for me, why this is not being sort of exploited. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. Until next time. Bye bye.